In today's video, we're going to talk about a case that happened a long time ago. Let's go back in time a bit and learn the story of Margaret Allen, better known as Bill. Margaret Allen was born in 1906 in Rawtenstall, a small town in the Rawtenstall district of Lancashire, England. She was the 20th of 22 children. Her family lived in extreme poverty. Their home had only 2 rooms, a living area with a coal fireplace and a small kitchen with a cold water tap. Sharing such a tiny house with over 20 people was far from easy, but it was all they had, so they made do. Before we continue the case, here's a quick curiosity about what daily life was like back then. It's not directly related to the crime, but it helps visualize the environment those people lived in. Since this case is very old, there are few images of it. So I'll be using real images of the city from that time to give you a better idea of how everything was, okay? To give you an idea of their living conditions, there were no indoor bathrooms. The toilets were out on the street. There were 5 outdoor toilets lined up side by side, shared by everyone on the street, which had around 80 houses. Each family took turns cleaning them, and they were emptied just once a week. Now let's do some quick math. If there were 80 homes and say 10 people living in each, that's around 800 people. That means 800 people shared just 5 toilets. Divide that, and you get 160 people per toilet. And remember, they were only cleaned once a week. Yeah, suddenly that dirty public restroom doesn't seem so bad, right? Margaret's childhood was typical for poor children of her time. She only made it through elementary school and worked in factories to help support her family. It was during England's Second Industrial Revolution, when child labor was normal, and children often worked long hours in factories just like adults. Margaret stood out, though. She was seen as different from the other kids. She didn't enjoy playing with other girls. She preferred hanging out with the boys, even if their games were rough and often left her with a few scars. As Margaret reached her teenage years, she cut her hair short and started wearing only men's clothes, insisting she wanted to be known as Bill. The exact reason for her name choice isn't known, but some sources suggest it was inspired by someone she cared about deeply during childhood, maybe a late grandfather or a close friend. Now, going by Bill, she decided she would only take on traditionally male jobs, things like hauling coal, fixing things, or any kind of heavy labor. You'd think someone like Bill would have faced a lot of prejudice for that choice, especially back then. But surprisingly, that doesn't seem to have been the case, at least not openly. Bill never publicly complained about discrimination, and she seemed to live her life without major issues. We have to remember, those were tough times. Most people were too busy worrying about where their next meal would come from to care much about how someone else dressed or identified. In fact, Bill had no trouble finding work. She was willing to do the hard jobs no one else wanted, and she didn't complain. And if we stop to think about it, if there had been any real prejudice, no one would have hired her. And back then, there were no organizations to protect people from that kind of bias. That said, things hadn't always been that lenient. From 1533 to 1885, homosexuals in the UK were considered enemies of the state and could even face the death penalty. But that law specifically targeted gay men. Women often flew under the radar and were generally ignored. Later on, after getting her driver's license, proving herself as a hardworking person, and passing a test, Bill landed a job as a bus driver. This was considered one of the best jobs for wage workers at the time. It was a calm job, rarely requiring heavy lifting or physical effort. And the best part? You got home clean, unlike most jobs back then. The pay was also a bit better, which alone made it worth it. Bill was living the best phase of her life, a good job, a decent salary, and a family that accepted her for who she was. But then Bill started showing violent behavior, something unusual for her. No one really knows why this sudden change happened, but some say it was Bill's desperate need to prove she was a real man, using violence as a way to assert herself, a common tactic among men at the time. Bill began frequenting bars where men gathered after work, and fights and trouble were common there. Over time, some calmer men started fearing her, and Bill earned a reputation as a bully. On one hand, Bill was gaining respect from many men in town. On the other, she was losing respect from those close to her. Because of her violent behavior, many longtime friends started to distance themselves out of fear. It's said that when Bill wasn't physically aggressive, she was verbally abusive, insulting people to assert dominance or sometimes just without reason. Obviously, this toxic behavior couldn't end well, and sooner or later, things fell apart. Not long after this drastic personality change, Bill got fired from her bus driver job. The reason? She started insulting and assaulting passengers. Sources say if Bill thought a passenger was taking too long to get on the bus or find a seat, all hell would break loose. There are even reports that Bill physically threw passengers off the bus after losing her temper with them. After being fired, Bill bounced around various jobs but couldn't hold down any of them. In 1935, Bill told her family she had checked into a hospital for a delicate surgery. Later, she implied the procedure was meant to make her a complete man. However, the same reports used for this story say there are no hospital records of Bill's admission in England at that time. It's likely Bill lied to her family to make them believe she had physically transitioned through surgery. Why she lied is unclear, especially since her family accepted her, as mentioned before. But it's said that after losing her bus driver job and drifting away from close friends, Bill was never the same. Annie Cook, the only friend who stuck by her, said she became very depressed over the loss of her friends and her job. It's probable that Bill developed some mental health issues and started making up stories to get attention. According to Annie, Bill's sadness only worsened over the years, and she sought refuge in cigarettes and alcohol. There's no solid info on Bill's love life, but some speculate she and Annie Cook had a romance, though that remains just speculation. In 1943, Bill's mother passed away, and since she was very close to her, the loss hit her hard. Bill became even more withdrawn, and her addictions to smoking and drinking worsened. It's said she also neglected her nutrition and personal hygiene, going days without bathing and suffering frequent mental breakdowns. Bill lived alone in a rundown building that used to be the Rawtenstall police headquarters, located on the town's main street, Bakeup Road. She had invested all her savings to buy the place, a few years before her mother passed away. According to Annie Cook, living alone only made Bill's condition worse. She reported that Bill tried to take her own life at least once using coal gas. Coal gas is highly toxic and was only replaced by natural gas for cooking and heating in England during the 1970s. Before that, there were countless poisoning cases ending in tragedy. On August 29, 1948, a woman's body was found on a road right in front of Bill's house. Police identified her as Nancy Ellen Chadwick, a 68-year-old widow. From what I found in my research, Nancy was known as an unpleasant and somewhat eccentric woman in the neighborhood. She was said to live comfortably, known for carrying large amounts of cash in her purse, but preferred to take money from others rather than spend her own. There's no clear info on how she took money from people. After all, she was a 68-year-old lady. The most likely theory is she scammed people, using her fragile appearance to her advantage. At first, police thought Nancy had been hit by a car since she had multiple injuries, especially on her head, typical of someone thrown by a vehicle. They immediately launched an investigation because even if it was an accident, someone caused it and fled without helping, which is a crime. Later, the police determined that Nancy's injuries were actually caused by a coal hammer, making the situation much more serious. The police tried hard to keep this information under wraps because it was the first fatal crime recorded in Rawtenstall. As a result, detectives from Scotland Yard were called in to take over the case and solve it as quickly as possible. Their job was relatively easy since they found a trail leading from where Nancy was found to the building where Bill lived. This suggested Nancy was attacked inside Bill's building and then dragged to the spot where her body was left. The detectives went to Bill's building to question her but didn't enter. Bill said she had seen and talked to Nancy on August 28th, a day before her body was found. She claimed they didn't discuss anything important and that Nancy left afterward. The detectives thanked her and said they'd keep inspecting the area for evidence. Bill then offered to help, and they accepted. A few minutes later, Bill pulled a detective by the sleeve and pointed toward the nearby River Irwell, saying, "Look, there's something there." Sure enough, there was something in the river. Nancy Chadwick's purse, missing some belongings, including the money she was known to carry. In the following days, Scotland Yard detectives continued their investigation. The news of the crime quickly spread through Rawtenstall. The community was both scared and intensely curious. The case was extremely sensitive. Rawtenstall had never seen a crime like this before, as I mentioned. That's why the police kept information from the press, which only fueled public curiosity. Bill quickly became the center of attention after casually mentioning in a bar that she'd been one of the last people to see Nancy alive and had helped the detectives find her purse. Soon, The solitary Bill was surrounded everywhere by people bombarding her with questions about the case, and she loved it. Wherever she went, people stopped her to ask about the crime. In bars, they bought her drinks and spent hours chatting with her. Bill was even interviewed by journalists who wrote stories based on what she shared. As days passed, it seemed Bill fully embraced her new role as a local minor celebrity. She frequented multiple bars around town, greeted by dozens of curious folks buying her drinks in exchange for information. Of course, it wasn't long before things spiraled out of control. In some of these talks, Bill got carried away. Maybe it was the alcohol, overconfidence, or just plain recklessness. The fact is, she revealed details only the detectives, or the killer, should have known. This info reached Scotland Yard detectives, who decided to pay Bill's building another visit. This time they went inside. It was September 1st, 1948. After a brief search, detectives found enough evidence linking Bill to the crime. Besides belongings of the victim, they found bloodstains in the basement and strands of Nancy's hair on one of Bill's clothes. There's no record that the hammer used in the attack was ever found. Apparently, Bill got rid of it. Taken into custody with all the evidence stacked against her, Bill had no choice but to confess. During her confession, she said Nancy knocked on her door on August 28th and insisted on coming in. Bill admitted she was in a bad mood that day and decided to let Nancy in just to take out her anger on her. She said she then dumped Nancy's body where it was found the next day. She even claimed to have felt pleasure committing the crime. Despite Bill blaming her bad mood, detectives had another theory. A quick investigation revealed Bill was drowning in debt because her violent behavior made it impossible to keep a job. She received government assistance after claiming illness, but it wasn't enough to survive. No one knows exactly what illness Bill had. Some sources say she was going through menopause, which confused and depressed her since she believed she was a complete man. Others say it was a lung disease from years working in coal mining. For the detectives, the motive was financial, given her debts. Everyone who knew Nancy knew she carried large sums of money in her purse, possibly just an old lady's habit. Bill knew this too and decided to take advantage of it, not just to rob her, but to take her life. Bill's trial was quick, only 5 hours. Her lawyer, aware Bill likely faced the maximum sentence given the crime's nature, pleaded insanity. Her lawyer argued that Bill was mentally ill, believed herself to be a man, and therefore couldn't be judged as a normal person. She claimed Bill should be sent to a mental institution, not prison. Despite the lawyer's efforts, the insanity plea failed. Bill was found guilty and sentenced to death. Her only friend, Annie Cook, organized a petition to commute the sentence. But out of over 30,000 people living in Rawtenstall at the time, only 162 signed, making the petition useless. Even imprisoned with her days numbered, Bill remained rude and aggressive to everyone around her. On the day guards brought her last meal, a plate of scrambled eggs she had requested, Bill kicked the tray, spilling the food on the floor. Then she said, "At least no one else will want this meal." On the morning of January 12, 1949, Bill Allen was led to the gallows in the execution chamber, where the sentence was carried out. It said she showed no remorse and didn't give a final statement, staying silent until the end.